campaign. Do you trust the DOJ to investigate itself?
I do not. And just ask yourself this question. Why wasn't this being investigated already? Why did it take a tweet from the President of the United States to get Rod Rosenstein off his duff? And then what does Rod Rosenstein do in response to the President's tweet? He assigns it to the Inspector General. Well, this should have been already under investigation by Mr. Huber, the U.S. attorney that Sessions appointed to investigate the FISA abuses, because this is all directly related to that. Now, the Inspector General has no authority over former DOJ and FBI officials. So who's he going to ask about this? There's no one to question inside the Department of Justice and the FBI today. So this is a sham. This is a typical Rod Rosenstein move. Too cute by half. This could be his undoing. What a disgraceful thing for him to say last night. And if there's anything inappropriate, if this happened, we'll take appropriate action. What the hell does that mean?
The President of the United States saying that he's going to move on official action today, demanding that the DOJ move.
I would assume that would involve having the White House counsel call directly the Attorney General and Mr. Rosenstein, or invite them over to the White House, quote unquote, them over to the White House for a meeting. This is dangerous territory for Sessions and Rosenstein. They're playing games with the President of the United States. It's very ugly. It's insulting to the President for Rod Rosenstein to say he's going to ask the Inspector General to talk to people that he knows the Inspector General has no authority to talk to, and he has no subpoena authority. This is a Potemkin investigation. It is a joke. It's an insult to the President, and if I were the President, I would be very, very angry by the response from Rosenstein last night.
Remind me of your position here, because I know we've had this conversation before. Do you think the President should be more personally involved in ferreting out the truth from the Justice Department? Is this a risk for him politically to start this process?
It is not a risk for him. We are long since beyond all. Remember this. The President of the United States is the chief law enforcement officer of this country. The Justice Department, the FBI, work for him. He proved that by firing James Comey, which he could have done for any reason. And he could fire Sessions and Rosenstein tomorrow, perfectly proper, perfectly constitutional. Since Watergate, there has always been this belief that, oh, well, you better not talk to the Justice Department. It's going to look like political interference. We are way beyond that now. And that is because the DOJ under Obama and the FBI under Obama was totally politicized when it came to Donald Trump. The President has every right in the world to demand to know from the Attorney General and his deputy what's going on, what's being done, and in what terms. If he wants to use the White House counsel to do that, that's fine. But the White House counsel has to be willing to do that, and it isn't clear that Mr. McGahn is willing to do that. So the President's doing what he can do, which is tweet. Very, very effective, perfectly proper, perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, and all these complaints from idiots like Mark Warner and others that this is very dangerous territory is absolute nonsense.
Joe, the New York Times Magazine has a piece about what you need to know about Stephen Halper, and they say that by all accounts, launching a counterintelligence investigation to ensure that campaign officials aren't vulnerable to foreign influence and blackmail is standard operating procedure at the FBI. It's not a scandal. Do you agree with that?
I most certainly do not. This had nothing to do with that. This was a ruse to plant information inside the Trump campaign so that it would blow back to the FBI knowingly, and they could use it to then get FISA warrants. Let's remember, they already had FISA taps on the Russian ambassador. They already had FISA taps on all the Russian officials they needed to know about and other foreign officials. These were efforts to get wiretaps on Americans, not on foreign officials. And this is such an outrageous post hoc rationalization. Let's remember, Brennan and Clapper and Comey all denied there was any such surveillance going on of Americans. That was a lie. They lied to Congress. They lied to the American people. Now you're getting the post hoc rationalization from Clapper and others. Oh, this was a good thing to do to spy on the Trump campaign. What idiocy.
Well, especially because it is self-destructive, the actual argument, which is to say, if they truly believe that the Russians hijacked the election by way of the Trump campaign, they would have stopped that process early on. That would be the correct response to that, if you're the FBI, is to notify the principal, in this case Donald Trump, or to go in and start making arrests early on in order to stop any of this from getting out of control. Yet that's not what happened at all. They let this alleged scenario play out, and then now they're saying that there was a Russian conspiracy. None of this makes sense to me, Joe.
Well, of course it doesn't make sense, because the reason that's being given for it to exist, which is to find out whether or not there was Russian intrusion, is a lie. This was done to create false information to blow back into American FBI hands so that they could get surveillance on Trump officials. Just remember, all of this starts with Stephen Halper and others approaching Papadopoulos, Carter Page, and others. We know that Halpern approached many witnesses who had been interviewed by Mr. Mueller. There is no doubt what this was about. This was a covert operation being run by John Brennan and James Comey against the presidential candidate of the opposing party. And for Rod Rosenstein to make a joke of it by proposing that the IG investigate this is ridiculous.
Give us a sense of how exceptional this is, that you have an FBI informant inside of the Trump campaign.
I know of no other campaign in American history which has been subjected to this type of surveillance. And I would ask Director Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein to give us a list of all American campaigns that have been subjected to this type of illegal surveillance.
All right, well, Joe, we've got more time with you here, and I want to talk to you about that, how Stephen Halper was involved in a 1980 campaign with Reagan and Carter, and how this is different. So we've got that coming up with Joe. It is 7:15 now on WMA. We are joined by Joe diGenova here to discuss everything that's going on here with all these investigations. Joe, we're talking about Stephen Halper, the man who's alleged to have been the spy, or if you're from, you'd like to call him the informant, on the Trump campaign. But in the 1980 election, in the Reagan campaign, they used CIA officials managed by Stephen Halper, supposedly under the director of George H.W. Bush, who was the CIA director and then the vice presidential candidate, this from inside the Carter administration. So how is this different?
What's more interesting than anything else about this is that Stefan, by the way, is the way he pronounces his name. We must get the correct Cambridge accent.
Yes,
his name.
Stefan
Frankenstein.
Was used then because his father-in-law was the deputy director of the CIA. He married the daughter of the deputy director of the CIA, Ray Klein. And so he was well known, he was used, and they were getting information about what was going on inside the CIA from sources in there. I have no problem with any. By the way, this was all looked into at that time appropriately. I don't have any problem with it being looked at again. By the way, what's really interesting about this? You remember the two stories over the last few days, one in the Washington Post and one in the New York Times, where the people inside the deep state are giving their version of why there was spying going on or informants being placed in.
Right.
On Saturday morning, the Washington Post writes an editorial saying that the Republican Party is threatening to expose an informant and erode trust in intelligence after they published a story in their paper practically giving the guy's name. Now, you have to be mentally ill to write an editorial like that. So let me make a suggestion to the people at the Washington Post on the editorial board. I challenge them to send a member of their editorial board to the National Press Club to debate me on this very issue at a time of their choosing. I await their response.
You'll be waiting for some time. Let's talk about this information and how it's leaking out there. Devin Nunes is to the point where he and Trey Gowdy didn't even go to a meeting that they were supposed to have at the Justice Department on Friday, out of fear that the contents of that meeting would be leaked by the Justice Department. He's saying over the weekend, look what happened. Look at all of the news that broke Friday about this informant.
They would have been blamed for it.
That's right.
They would have been blamed for it if they had met with Rosenstein and his minions. Rosenstein and his people would have leaked that it was Nunes who leaked all this information that came out over the weekend. So I say bravo to Nunes. I would not meet with Rosenstein and any of his people ever again.
Well, this is an insane situation where Congress can't even have private meetings to get answers anymore for fear that they're going to be framed as the leakers. This is out of control. The president clearly needs to be involved now.
And I'll tell you why it's out of control. It's out of control because the Deputy Attorney General wants it this way. And Jeff Sessions is AWOL, has no idea what's going on in his department. This is unacceptable for a president of the United States to have two people like this in the department, one allegedly recused, the other an anti-Trumper, functioning as in complete derogation of all presidential authority and trying to make a fool of the President of the United States at the same time. You sense exactly what the problem is, and it's never going to get any better until Rosenstein's gone.
Well, as you said, Jeff Sessions is somewhat AWOL. He recused himself from all things having to do with the Russia investigation, but that doesn't mean that when it comes to the president demanding an investigation, he can be involved in that, correct?
That's exactly right. And so why did Rosenstein put out the statement about investigating whether or not there was an infiltration? This far exceeds any recusal that Jeff Sessions is a part of. Sessions is afraid of his own shadow. He can no longer function as Attorney General. The president has to decide how long he can have this type of situation at the Department of Justice. This is completely unacceptable.
Joe, there's another big decision the president has to make, and it's whether or not he's going to sit down with Bob Mueller. Rudy Giuliani is saying that the investigation could be wrapped up by September 1st if Mueller gets what he wants, that interview.
Yes, Mueller wants one thing, an opportunity to frame the President of the United States by bringing him into a meeting where he can ask him questions. And remember, this is exactly how Patrick Fitzgerald and James Comey framed Scooter Libby. They asked him questions, and only one other person disagreed with his answer. They brought a perjury case against Scooter Libby on two different recollections of one conversation. The president should never meet with Mueller because Mueller's investigation is an investigation based on bad faith. It has become a roving minstrel of evil. It no longer deserves the respect of the American people. And while the president should not fire Mueller because it would create political problems, he should ignore this ridiculous invitation to come and talk to him. And besides that, the president cannot be indicted, so what's the reason to talk to him? The answer is very simple. A perjury trap so that he can refer the matter to the House of Representatives, something which Mr. Mueller does not have the authority to do under the regulation.
Now, the Inspector General's report has been sent for a draft has been sent for review. They say it should be coming out in a couple of weeks. My prediction, I think, it's going to come out Friday because the Friday of a holiday weekend is when most people would want this released, except for the Republicans.
Well, that's exactly what Rod Rosenstein's plan is, to bury it. First of all, you leaked the stories to the New York Times and the Washington Post about all this stuff that you just saw come out about Stefan Halper, and now the next will be the leak of the report on how the Hillary Clinton email investigation was thrown by the dirty cop, James Comey, and all the people around him. But I think this is part of the problem for Rod Rosenstein. By putting the report out on a holiday weekend, they're simply going to draw attention to it because everyone knows now that the maneuver like that is coming, and it's going to backfire because it's going to show how fundamentally dishonest Rosenstein is and how his interests are not those of the president or the American people, but they are those of Rod Rosenstein and the longevity in his job.
All right. Well, Joe diGenova, thank you so much. We always appreciate your input on all of these issues. And the way we've been going, we get to talk to you twice a week because there's just so much going on. So maybe we'll get to speak with you again later in the week. Joe, have a fantastic week if we don't get to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thanks a lot.
7:23 on WMAN.